Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I hope everyone's having a terrific Tuesday. Today we're going to be painting the animated objects. Though I have both, I chose an STL for the animated armor over the WizKids one because it looked like it had a bit of magic essence flowing through it, and I like a little pop with my miniatures. The arm of the armor didn't really print well, but I decided to leave it off anyway because there was only a gauntlet, and my general thought process for this model was that it was supposed to look a little old and worn. I'm going to add some rust and verdigris effects to it. The sword is a Games Workshop bit that I had lying in a bits box. It still has its sheath on it, and I can imagine describing to the players when rolling for, or before rolling for initiative, that the sword begins to levitate and move away from them. Imagine their surprise when they try to grab their weapon and the sheath stays in their hand and the weapon slides smoothly out and tries to stab or slash them. The rug of Smothering is also an STL, because I wanted to print it large enough that if a character model was standing on it or was prone on top of it, it would represent that for a 25mm character. I think this model can enjoy double use as a flying carpet, as that seems to be one of the favorite magic items my characters like to see, and it doesn't really break the game, so I like to reward them with it. I'd say I didn't really have a hard time finding any STLs or any good things for this, because all I really needed was a suit of armor, but I wanted to have a little bit of, I don't know, just something sticking out of it, something magical essence or force. Something that said, oh, there's something controlling this, and even for Pathfinder, this kind of works because in Pathfinder, you can have animated objects that are locomoted by ghosts. So you could really kind of do something with that. The rug is Smothering. I could see that being something kind of scary, especially if if it's not like its own fight, if it's introduced like in the middle of an already existing fight, all of a sudden one character is being smothered by this rug and everybody else is, getting shot with arrows or, stabbed by orcs or whatever. Animated objects. They're created with magic and or curses. I'd like to think that a lot of them are created by just wizards with too much time on their hands or particularly spiteful sorcerers. And I also like the fact that one might be cursed, like maybe a magical carpet, like a flying carpet might have had a particularly cruel owner who it saw, sneak into somebody's window and strangle them at night. And it eventually, because these animated objects, you find they kind of take on the temperament of the humans or the animals or whatever that they're around. So most have no real presence of mind, but their magic will kind of absorb personas or humanoid conversational traits. So they could sort of be helpful, but only because they've seen other things be helpful in the past, or maybe they strangle you, but that's because they've seen other people be strangled in the past. They follow commands and will follow the last given command forever, like until the magic runs out or whatever happens, it just drops. So like a magical broom that is told to sweep and then its master dies, he just keeps on sweeping forever. It makes me wonder if a den of animals moves into a space occupied by an animated object, will it try to adopt like an animal persona, or is that only for like humanoid traits? I gotta kind of have a feeling that it might be an animal persona, or it might adopt an animal persona because of the magic that's involved in it. It would be kind of neat to have an animated broom that, all it wants to do is run around and chase people all day, or maybe a suit of armor that gets on all fours and just wants to play fetch all day, just fetches stuff. That'd be kind of funny. This is apparently more common when these things are created in the Feywild, where magic is kind of weird, strong, and has very unintended consequences. Animated objects can be created in more than one realm. Obviously, there's a material plane, but it talks of a lot of them being created in the Feywild and for like sort of mischievous tricks or, for the amusement of the Fey, which it makes sense. So if you drop a animated object to 0 hit points, the magic inside of it is dispelled and destroyed forever, and the item is too damaged to be of any use. Kind of a funny thing, one time I had a PC that wanted to restore an animated armor in the Curse of Strahd, not knowing that it was cursed. That's how it was created. After the battle, they were really trying not to damage it a whole lot. So afterward, I totally let him restore it. He polished it up, banged out all the dents, put it on, and in combat, it actively moved him get hit with attacks. Like he would have his shield out and he'd stride into combat and something would attack him, like an orc would attack him with a two-handed axe, and his shield would move out of the way and his neck would be bared to the axe, and he'd get hit like almost every time. And he kept saying like, oh my God, I've got full plate. My armor class is like a 20 or 21. Why am I still getting hit every single time? And it was kind of funny because they didn't even realize it in the first like 2 combats. It took when he was trying to take the armor off to like go to sleep at night, and he found that he couldn't get it off. It was like attached to his skin, and all of a sudden he thought to himself, oh crap, this is actually cursed. But that was a low level campaign, and I remember, I think it was like level maybe 2 or 3 when they found the armor. I thought to myself, well, if I were them, I wouldn't. They're only level 3 and they're going to get a suit of full plate, or they think they are anyway. So I knew that they weren't going to have remove curse for a long time. And I didn't want this paladin, he was a paladin, I didn't want him to be useless for the next like 4 levels or 12 sessions or whatever it is. I didn't want him to just sit there and have a bad time. So I also allowed him to remove the armor forcefully, but every time he did, it was like peeling off his skin. So it would deal a lot of damage. I don't know, 2d6 or something like that. And I think I made the breastplate 3d6. So not a whole lot of damage, but a lot of damage for a level 2 to 3 character. I think he was level 3 by the time he tried to start getting it off. I kind of thought also that this was a good example of a cursed item, because the player should have known that he wasn't supposed to find a suit of full plate when he just started off the campaign. I think it was our 3rd session that he found it, and he knew it was magical even after they fought it, because after they fought it and destroyed it, he cast detect magic on it and saw that it was magical. And they decided to put it on anyway after fixing it, but without doing any kind of a check to see, you know, like an Arcana check or identify spell or anything like that to see if it was cursed. And the DC wasn't super high. I think for this particular cursed item, I put the DC at Arcana check 13, which meant that, you know, even a character that didn't really have Arcana but maybe had a +2 or +3 intelligence had a pretty decent chance at finding out. I just let everybody, you know, do checks one after the other if one of them fails. So it's not really that big of a deal, or it shouldn't have been anyway. This was just a case of I got the players, and it really, sometimes that does feel good, especially when you know that they're not going to die from it. But I put them in a timed situation. They sort of had to peel off this armor piece by piece over like the course of 3 days while they were running from a bunch of werewolves. So that was kind of fun. Yeah, cursed items seem to get a sort of a bad rap because you need a slightly mid-level spell to remove them, that being remove curse. To counter this, I always make a secondary way of removing the item and discarding it. Usually that secondary way is some sort of brute force and might leave like a bit of scarring or something like that. But I like to give my players different options other than just use or pay for this magic spell or deal with the curse. Curses and cursed items are created in really demented ways, and if it's done by a person, usually for some crazy reason or another. I like to think that the magic needs like a secondary way to lift the curse, and usually that way is, well, it's kind of embarrassing, or sometimes it hurts, or one or both. They're kind of like jigsaw puzzles from the Saw series to me. Animated armor. You know, animated armor, when I think about it, I kind of think about heavy plates of metal that are banging and clattering around. I mean, this is a suit of armor, and if you've ever seen one of those fall or drop, it makes a tremendous amount of sound. I think a lot of DMs miss this, myself included, when I first started using animated armors, but I think that it would be interesting to tell my players like, you're coming up to this corridor and you hear an intense amount of just a cacophony of metal grinding against metal, banging. Sounds like some toddlers in there with like pots and pans just going crazy. And they're thinking to themselves, what the heck could this possibly be? And finally they like sneak up around, and it's like a suit of animated armor that's just banging around like clang, 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 you know, stomping around the place. I think that they could also be good alarms if they're set to like a sentry mode, or something that where, you know, everything is completely silent. Obviously everyone wants to stay quiet. And then they get into combat with this this enormous piece of animated armor, this full plate, and it just starts banging around, making a bunch of noise. And like, even if there's no real monsters around to be alerted, I like to tell players that they're creating an awful lot of noise. Like I warn them as a DM, even when they're not going to be ambushed by anything, because I like to put them in that mindset that, oh no, I'm creating a lot of noise and maybe I shouldn't. The monster manual says that it's like the vengeful spirit of a fallen knight. I'd like to think that this could be made more than one way if it was like a curse or a cursed item. Maybe by a knight that's stabbed in the back in a battle and just full of spite and hate as he or she died. Maybe that spite and hatred transferred over to the armor. I also kind of think it's neat that these can be enchanted to utter words, require passwords, or even deliver riddles. Some can even hold entire conversations, but the monster manual does say that these are few and far between. I'd love to think that players exploring around would all of a sudden hear like a disembodied voice coming from this animated armor offering them a riddle, and if they don't answer it correctly or a password, then it makes a whole lot of noise. Probably something that maybe earlier on it was a puzzle that they just decided, I'm not going to deal with this right now, and the puzzle would give them the answer to the riddle or the password or something like that. And if they stick with it and do it, then they don't have to fight this armor. I can also see one of these things clanging up and bellowing something like, "Stay out of my swamp," if the campaign was, just a bit silly, or maybe had a little bit of a humorous tone to it. Or you could imagine this thing coming up and speaking in like this nerdy wizard voice. He's like, "Excuse me, I very much appreciate it if you got out of my library right now, please. Thank you." Something like that. It would be real funny. I think it would kind of a tension-breaking moment, and the silliness would belie the fact that this thing is actually kind of dangerous, because it does do a fair bit of damage and has a pretty high AC because it is a suit of armor. They are CR1, and really all the animated objects in here are fantastic monsters. You can freak out the PCs by having things move when their backs are turned, and the only better ambush that I can think of is probably from a mimic, because all of a sudden players are thinking, oh my god, it's a mimic, or they're thinking maybe it's ghosts or something's moving things around, and it's really just these animated objects like moving around. Kind of like in the beginning of Beauty and the Beast, except for instead of show tunes, then they all attack with like knives and drawers and stuff. That'd be kind of funny. And since they are CR1, you can put them in pretty low adventures, like low level adventures, and not feel too bad about it. Or you can put them in high level adventures too, and like I said, they're great guards, and especially when PCs don't want to make a lot of noise or whatever. Unsurprisingly, it has construct immunities, and it's also immune to poison and psychic damage, being a construct and all. Although the type that you usually see, and the one that I painted up, looks like full plate, it would be pretty cool to see spiked animated armor, or maybe even different types like animated chainmail. The only thing you really need to do is lower the creature's AC to represent the armor being used, and you're pretty much good to go. Add poison immunity, and you can imagine like hide armor with bladders of poison ready to spray onto anything that pierces it in close combat. That would be pretty evil. I like it. It's evil and fun and challenging without being overwhelming, because hide armor would have, of course, lower AC than the other animated armors, and it would just provide a little bit of a challenge, something that might tell the PCs, okay, you need to think about this for a second. You can't just run in and just start hacking at this thing. You have to retreat and do a little movement shenanigans. Maybe find somewhere it can't get to you and pepper it with arrows or smack it with magic until it goes down. Especially at low level, poison is not something to mess around with. It could really mess you up. As NPCs, I think animated armors could be interesting, maybe to, like I said before, to follow the players around acting like a dog, or maybe, just some weird magical kind of servant that walks around with them. They don't have to worry about feeding it, and it's not like a hireling where they have to worry about keeping it happy, although maybe they have to like play fetch with it to keep it happy or something like that. Good NPC, kind of odd and a little bit magical. It fits the D&D sort of trope really well. Plus, if you think about like what you really remember from campaigns, it's always these weird things that stand out. You would say like, do you remember that time that we found that suit of animated armor and it followed us around and acted like it was our dog, and we were able to like carry a bunch of extra stuff on it because it had a big carry weight. Aside from that, you could do sort of like an Aladdin thing, or maybe a Beauty and the Beast thing, where the animated objects are like a guide, or maybe even just a curiosity piece. If you remember in Aladdin, he finds the rug in that vault of treasures or whatever it's called, and it guides them to the lamp. I would say if you do this, don't be afraid to give it attributes. Maybe it acts like a dog and slobbers dust all over the PC, and maybe it has the mannerisms of an erudite elf and wants nothing to do with dirty humans riding it if it's like a carpet or something like that. Or just have fun with it and make sure that whatever you do, you kind of keep it consistent, so that way the players will always have it in their mind, oh, this is what this thing does, this is what its attributes are. I don't think you could really make a campaign out of PCs who are flying objects, unfortunately. It would be kind of interesting as a one-off, but I don't think it would work for too long because the humor would wear off eventually. Now, I could see a good idea for a one-shot being the PCs as a bunch of animated objects who suddenly become sentient after their wizard creator dies, and the scene starts with his dead body in front of the PCs, and they have to figure out maybe how he died before their magical essence runs out. That would be kind of a good one-shot, and it would sort of give you a little bit of interesting premise, not just normal whodunit. Sort of like when I think about one-shots that seem good or seem memorable, they're always ones that specifically have to do with the theme and the tone of the universe that you're trying to emulate. So in D&D, you kind of want to, you don't just want to make this like a classic whodunit where a bunch of people are in a castle and one of them's the killer. You kind of want it to be like, oh, well, you're all animated objects, and the guy who's dead is the wizard, and you have to figure it out, and this and that. I think that would be really fun. When I think about the one-shots that I've either DM'd in or played in that were really memorable, they always have to do with that theme of the universe. I once DM'd a one-shot for Free RPG Day that was a bunch of wizard familiars that were trying to solve a mystery while their wizards were drunk at a bar at like a magical wizard conference in this one town. And that was really fun. I liked it a lot. And I think the players had fun with it too. And it wasn't, you could tell that the one shot wasn't super powerful or anything. It just happened to just be a bunch of cats and dogs. And even like there was a snake, and I think I had a raccoon and a bird. And even the bird had something to do. I made sure that every because I made the familiars and they just got to pick from a set of like 10 of them, but I made sure that whatever they picked, they would have some good use in the story. They're like, oh, thank God we picked this bird, we can fly in through this window and unlock the door, the latch on the door or something like that. Flying sword. It could really just be flying weapons, or it could be a flying mace or flying daggers or any or all types of weapons, including self-reloading crossbows. It kind of reminds me of the Bubble of Evil in the Wheel of Time, when all the weapons and pots and stuff came to life and they had to hit them with dirt or like make them touch the ground in order for them to go inert. And I like that a lot. I think that was a really, really good scene in Wheel of Time, because adding a secondary objective to a fight or an encounter that isn't just kill things until they're dead from it is really good. If you describe how when a barbarian with a two-handed axe swinging downward hits this dagger but doesn't destroy the dagger, but the dagger flies into the dirt and then doesn't move anymore, the PCs might get it in their head, oh great, let me use some of these other spells that I don't normally use in combat, like maybe I'll mage hand some dirt and sprinkle it over things, or maybe I'll see what I could do about making gust of winding some dirt around to like neutralize maybe a whole area, or maybe like a 20-foot cube or something. I really like that kind of combat. It really feels better than just, well, kill things until they're dead or until you're dead from it. It would be kind of cool also if a bunch of these flying weapons came to life because of some magical anomaly or some other mistake that makes magic fly out of control. Like maybe it was a barbarian that has wild magic and doesn't know how to control it. NPC, obviously not a PC, and they make that happen, but it's an accident. And it could lead it from an encounter of, a bunch of out of control flying weapons could lead into sort of a quest for the PCs, like, hey, how do we deal with this guy? How can we get him to understand his power a little better? Or maybe we need to just take him out of this town and he needs to live out in the woods for a little bit while he figures out how to control it. The use of this type of item, this type of monster feels more akin to a trap than kind of anything else. Like, here, take this example. Maybe there's a magical gizmo or a puzzle, and any wrong answer will activate more flying weapons to attack. So the PCs just can't brute force the trap. You ever give a PCs a trap that only has like two number combinations, and they're like, oh, well, this only has like 99 combinations. I can try each one. But you can kind of influence them not to do that if every single time they get one wrong, something else activates and starts to try to kill them. That's how I would use them. Meaning that like the first one that activates would be a weapon lying around the puzzle, but the second one would definitely be one of the PC's weapons, forcing them to destroy one of their own weapons. And that would be, I know it's mean, but don't worry. It's the second example. Like, you don't make their weapon be the first one, because if a barbarian's great axe all of a sudden comes to life and they have to destroy it, that barbarian is going to be like punching things until they find something new. But so always make sure that you warn your players with a trap like that. Make something around it come to life so that way they know not to do it. And if they do it again, then it's their own dumb fault. In Pathfinder, like I said before, they also list restless spirits and ghosts as an explanation for a dancing weapon, where the body is incorporeal and the weapon is all the PC can hit. And I think it's kind of a fair explanation, and it can be ported easily over to 5th edition if we really want to. It's really hard to hit anything in the ethereal plane anyway. Rug of Smothering. You can do some real evil with this item. The monster manual says they're created by rich merchants and people with sadistic twists who want to guard an item or their home, and the unsuspecting thief is wrapped in a rug and suffocated. And that's a hard way to go. The noise, cries for help, everything would be kind of muffled by the rug. All they find is just a dead thief lying on the ground, suffocated. It can also take the form of a flying carpet, a magic item that my group in particular enjoys whenever they find one. Can you imagine finding a flying carpet? And you're like, oh my God, I can show you the world. And you start to fly up with the command word because you got high enough on your Arcana check to identify it as a rug, like a flying carpet, but not high enough to identify it as a smothering rug. And so it flies you up in the air, and then it starts wrapping around your head and suffocating you. And you're like, you have to make that awful choice between either suffocating, holding on to it, or you can untangle yourself from it and then just fall to your death, I suppose, or to a lot of damage. I think it would be a great trap. I also think that you should, if you did this though, you should give your PCs clues so that they can piece it together. And if you have a really particularly observant or smart PC, they might be able to detect this kind of a trap beforehand. Maybe the PCs find a dead body near this thing that looks like he jumped from a great height and died. And they're like, oh, he jumped from a great height and died. But if they do a medicine check on it, they'll see that he was also half strangled before falling. You could say, oh, there's marks on his neck, bruising, things like that. Then they might figure it out. And then even if they don't, then later on they'll say, the clues were right there. How did we not see that? And maybe in the future, when you describe a room, they will be more observant and they'll like listen to what you have to say. I always think that if you're going to hit a PC with a trap, it should never be one of those things where you're like, okay, check for traps. You rolled low. There's a trap here. That's unfortunate. It should always be sort of clues that clue people in, or your players in that there is a trap in how you describe the room and how you describe what's around them. So that way they don't feel cheated by a low dice roll. They can always say, well, I should have asked more questions. I should have not messed with that switch, or maybe I should have messed with the switch, or something like that. The book says that it can be a straw mat and a hovel, but I don't imagine many peasants going about their way creating these things. This doesn't really feel like a super item that can be created as a cursed item. It feels more like a rich person thing, like having a shark tank to throw your enemies in, and also maybe the sharks have lasers. That's the level of rich that we're talking about. That's creating these rugs of smothering and laying them out to be, trapping unsuspecting people. I try not to use things like this as a DM just as a monster that waits and ambushes a player. I like to have the player find it, roll Arcana to identify it, and really give them a chance to roll high enough to discover the hidden arcane symbols, like a malicious program hidden in downloaded software. It's kind of like what I think of when I think of these things. Then if they're unlucky or possibly greedy, you hit them with that big reveal, and then they're like, ah, crap. All three of these monsters are just really top tier, and I encourage their use in any and every campaign that you can get them into. They fit in almost anywhere, from dungeons to heavily crowded marketplaces to merchant houses in the dead of night, or maybe even a palace that you're trying to sneak into, or a bad guy's lair. They're perfect for planned encounters, and they're also excellent for random encounters because they can be just about anywhere and they can come alive to attack for a variety of reasons. And even though they say that they're destroyed afterwards and the magical essence leaves them, I would try to see if you can give your players some sort of a reward for defeating these things. Like maybe the carpet was spun with threads of gold, and so it's worth something. Even though it's destroyed, it's got these threads of gold that are worth a bunch. Or perhaps, the flying weapon that was animated by this evil wizard has jewels in the pommel, and that jewel, although it might be scuffed or scratched or something, it might be usable after the battle's done. Picture this. Your PCs come across and decide to walk through an old battlefield. The remains of fallen warriors all around them, and they're on the lookout for skeleton attacks and zombies and what have you. And to see a shiny spear unmarred by dirt or age, all around are weapons that are rusted or armor that's all corroded. It's obviously a long ago battlefield. They use detect magic, maybe even Arcana, and bam, they see it's magical. You got them. Greedy treasure mongers, because they'll look at that thing and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I found a magical item. Oh, it's so good. They touch it and all of a sudden it stabs them, comes alive and stabs them. They're like, ah. Or maybe they roll high enough with Arcana or discover the clues around. They're like, DM probably wouldn't give us just a straight magic item lying around, would they? Let me not touch this. And I always like to say that you should give your PCs experience for overcoming the challenge, even if they circumvented the challenge. In fact, especially if they circumvented the challenge, because that kind of makes it so that they have this thought process that they don't just have to slaughter stuff in order to get experience points. Don't get me wrong, slaughtering things is incredibly fun, and sometimes you just want to murder a bunch of zombies or kill a couple orcs and be on with your day. But you should also encourage them to think laterally and think about how they can get experience points, not in a way easier than bleeding hit points out for it. Because then if you don't, then you just get a group of PCs that just wants to murder every single thing they ever come across. That's why I like to have some of my bad guys not necessarily be horrible, mustache twistingly evil villains. They're kind of maybe they have an alternative motive, or maybe just a different worldview, and they don't necessarily want violence. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive into animated objects. I think next time we're definitely going to go for ANKEGs, because that's next in alphabetical order, right? I hope you have a fantastic Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your day. Until next time, see you later.